Did I write that?
No.
One man had some toy trains that ran through his house. He tired of them, but couldn't make them stop. He tried to move, but they followed him. He tried playing music loud to drown out their noise, but they increased theirs to match it. He tried thinking about something else, but even when he could, their din was still in the background. Everyone has toy trains running through their homes, but they're on the ground floor. And you can go upstairs, if you ever realize you have one. To be normal, ordinary, and non-mystical is to be able to explain to yourself why anything you have done was acceptable under the circumstances. Repetition, the salve, nay, the camouflage of stupidity. Would you like me to repeat that? Whenever he closed his eyes, one man had nightmares. Whenever he closed his eyes, his mind ran off on its own worse than ever. Would you like me to repeat that and spell several of the words therein? Homonyms, homonyms, homonyms. On an imaginary planet, an imaginary man told his imaginary tongue, "Don't offer to help others in non-physical matters." And the old slippery one replied, "How about if they say they want it?" And the man shook his head in the negative and said, "Nah, it'd just be them imagining they do." More facts that could break your back or put out your eye if you could pick them up and look at them in the right way. Men only apologize for not being able to do things that they want to do. Warning, the proper perceiving of this removes all of the advertised nourishment from many proverbs of conventional wisdom. Standing on the corner, rolling back and forth, one foot to the other, glassy-eyed, stoned and dazed, available to anyone at very little cost. The mind of man, once a whore, forever on the street. With the ordinary, all artists have their individual creative influences, while with the mystics, all they have is their heartburn, headaches, turned ankles, and tax audits. And the blue sky opportunity to have them. Papa, I thought he was going to say, and the opportunity to deal with them. Well, boy, it could have been a trick. To be routine, mundane, and non-transcendental is to find your past exciting and fascinating. The problem with education being the answer to man's problems is that it is based on and limited to the consciousness of the educators. Another example of how the mind can't get the matter of cause and effect straight. Religion didn't cause guilt. Guilt caused religion. Then, Daddy, what did stupidity cause? We don't go into that just now, boy. According to one version, Satan's original name was the repetitious one. Statement of fact. In the physical, sine non quo world of survival, everything is of equal importance. Likewise in man's mental realm. Note, this is a trick statement of fact. One thing men like about music, movies, and other entertainments is that they give the mind something already going on that it can talk along with rather than being thrown to its own devices. The common crowd will gladly tolerate someone kicking at, spitting at, and criticizing them, but not the holding up of a plain mirror. Instead of tolerate, I guess I should say that they'll notice and even enjoy. In that case, I'm glad I didn't. Consciousness and the captaining of your ship. In the routine state, you're asleep at the wheel. One man had a suffering requisite, which he always met. A man's kind of man, wouldn't you say? To be just a regular guy is to be proud. You're just a regular guy. Without repetitious thought, there are no leg irons to the past. Men got the idea of churning butter until it turns into petrified butter from observing their minds at work. Men got the idea of One man's prescription for dealing with repetitious thought is keep your eyes always to the front. Life told reality to tell those men acting as local leaders amongst the ordinary that, hell, just because you can't practice what you preach is no reason to admit it. On the annual Ask the King Day, a local farmer approached the throne, bowed, and presented this question. Your Grace, do all men do stupid things which, immediately upon doing, they recognize as stupid? And his big shot ship immediately suspected that it was probably not in the best interest of his own self-image to respond to that one. A king's kind of king, wouldn't you say? On one world, to help the advanced creatures advance even more, life provided a communication system whereby individuals could say almost anything they wanted to, no matter how nonsensical, and everyone else would understand them just the same. One man hated sleep. He hated his consciousness being more out of his control than usual. As punishment for offending local reality, one man was offered the choice of either having the promising area of his brain removed or writing his autobiography. One man had a mind and thought, what'll I do with it? And it said, why do anything with it? And he replied, because if I don't, just look what it'll do to me. One particular characteristic of non-nourishing food is its redundancy. And a distinct trait of ordinary men is their slavish imitation of one another. Those who believe mankind in a crisis are themselves in one as regards comprehension. On one world, you're not permitted to say that you're conscious unless you can prove to yourself at that very moment that you are aware of your consciousness. A chap in the back row says, that seems fair enough. Wonder how he got in here. One man had a puzzle with several pieces. And a curious thing, when one of the pieces was present, the others weren't. At least, so it seemed to him. If 'twere possible on a higher plane, education would serve to inflame the minds of the young and enrage those of the elders, in an agreeable manner, of course. The great thing about mind-expanding drugs is how they constrict consciousness. One man left his world and went to another planet. And as marvelous as the trip had been, when he returned home, he finally ran face-long into the rhetorical fact that, what good did it do him? Trick moral. Why mystics publish no newspapers, or why they made up the idea of there being some kind of secret knowledge. But Pater dear, I thought you told me that mystics never made anything up. 'Tis true. My boy, 'tis true. Is that all you have to say about it, precious Father? Regarding that, yes. Regarding that, indubitably. One man had toy soldiers who fought and fought everywhere he went. Then he entered the fray, as he, you see, began trying to bring his attention under control. No one is as evangelical as a reformed drunk, nor none as annoying as the but recently realized dumb. You want to check your watches, your calendars, perhaps a hand mirror. No, we do not. One fungicide for the treatment of repetition is originality and creativity. One man had a reflecting pool into which he fell, but I assume all is well, since no more from him have we heard. We had that which all great TV prophets and real estate salesmen dread, a legitimate question, one that I did not write, one not from a shill, one that actually came in. I, of course, am not going to deal with it or have anything to say, but I just wanted to point out to you how frightening life can be, that you can just go right along every day and thinking that everything is fine, you have it under control, and something like that. Of all the beliefs and the conspiracies, the most, although this is not a belief, I'm going to point out what it would be, the most dastardly, the most nefarious conspiracy is one that actually exists. And one of the most dastardly, you looked at nefarious and nefarious conspiracies, is that life arranges it intellectually. When men go out to search for the truth, when men undertake the search for the secret, they do so from a preconceived position. That is the greatest conspiracy. That is the most dastardly compared to what men believe the conspiracies amount to. Because as long as you start out trying to discover the truth, as they used to call it, or the secret of life, which is what everyone starts out doing, that is the purpose of the mind, other than to make life more agreeable and more efficient to the body. But the thing about the mind is for it to discover, as men normally have called it, to discover the truth, figure out what's going on. That's after they once have developed enough technology on a day-by-day basis or on a long-range basis that they have free time. They're no longer saddled by the clock of survival. They no longer are driven every day, every waking hour, having to seek shelter and food and etc. So once the mind has done that part of its job, then what it's left with is attempting to discover the meaning of life. It can be called all sorts of things. It turns into religious dogmas and descriptions, but that is still what it is. But consider the conspiracy that everyone starts out from a preconceived position. The conspiracy is this subtle also, that that's the way you can start out. So then you could say, so how come no one discovers it? And I could say, didn't you hear just what I said? That's how you must start out. And so it's impossible to begin your investigation of the meaning of life. And I'm talking about at a very early age, of just asking the questions of why. The mind being based upon something preconceived is impossible to begin this great journey. It's impossible for a Sir Lancelot to ride out of the castle, just past the moat. Assume he's left the sick fisher king, left the ailing king, the incomplete king, he's going out in search of the cure. And you can look at it as the nervous system, the human mind, once it's gotten enough time, as I just described it, to actually start operating in a theoretical, in a philosophical, in a mystical, or a would-be transcendental manner, then it becomes like the king, which is now assumed on top of the nervous system, but using one of the old European legends, it's the sick king. That Galahad, or who it was, Galahad shows up and he just wonders. He's never seen a castle like this, a land like this, a ruler like this, except the ruler is suffering from some malady that no one can diagnose, including the king. No one knows what's going on. And in some way it turns around that it seems to be his lot in life now to go out and find a cure for disease that no one can even diagnose. It's just now his charge to go do it. The subtle conspiracy, to mix up the pictures, would be then Galahad says, all right, I will undertake this great mythical, if not mystical, adventure. And he gets on his steed with all his weapons. He rides out across the moat. So he's left the land where he was. They pull up the bridge. As soon as he gets over the moat, wherever he starts to look is based upon what he took with him out of the castle to start with. So the idea that he has now come off the bridge, off the drawbridge, out into this expanse, the whole world, and the idea that he can now look anywhere he wants to, my friends, I hate to tell you, don't worry about the bankers and Germans hiding out in caves or Tibetan monks that are in touch with UFOs. No. No. The conspiracy is the mind thinking, well, what'll I do first? And then the mind wanting to say, are you wanting to be in conversation with your mind? You could have said it first. Well, what do we do now? And your mind goes, we can go in and do anything we want to. And you go, by God, you're right. There is a conspiracy within that conspiracy, by the way, is that men don't even try to do anything original. Not that they could, but they don't even try. But, okay, back to the first conspiracy. Those of you that passed tonight will go into the second stage some other lifetime. It's not necessary. You understand, even if there are, if I'm telling you correctly that there are more than one layers of conspiracies, it doesn't matter. As long as you don't see the first one, what the hell difference does it make? Whether it's 2 or 2 million. If you don't get past the first one, so what? I was just trying to slip into. The conspiracy is always this. I'll give perhaps more obvious hardwired examples. Someone can say, they can give a nice preface that their whole thing is they're attempting to go off and that their life has been devoted to a search for the truth, a search for the mystical reality behind the mundane, routine facade of what seems to be our conception of reality. And it goes on and on for a while, and you think, well, that almost sounds like my kind of guy. Until he slows down a little bit. Or you go, well, that's very interesting. At any rate, in a second, he's going to get to the point that his great search is on this basis. To find, personally, through his own efforts and gestures, to find additional proof of Sufism's validity. Did I start off too obscure? To find additional evidence of the authenticity of the Bible. Now, of course, to the Christians or the Muslims of the world, we've covered at least half the world's population by their own job application. And so half of them, at least, in theory, they would nod along with, by God, that's what you should be doing. Because, of course, their view, if you push the idea, well, that is not the truth, that is not in some way the secret of life, they go, well, that just shows that you're not a true Christian, or Muslim, or Jew, or whatever. Because that is the truth. The truth is right here, you little non-believer, right here in the Bible. And it could be in a secular area, but as always, I'm pointing out the so-called institutions of public religion have been that which even theoretically and verbally seems to be carrying the, albeit somewhat soggy, but would-be torch of transcendentalism and the search for the truth. It's like nobody constantly knows the damn thing is just barely flickering. Not much more than somebody running around with one waving it for Christian Democrats or neo-fascist, or at any rate, religion seems to be in charge. Do you understand the conspiracy, though? When you start out and you have something that you want to prove. And in the beginning, you got no choice. You have to leave the castle. It is not as though a Sir Galahad or the fictitious person I made up starts out being unusually stupid. The idea of starting out and figure out, you may think that something sparked it originally. As I point out, most people do, is they believe they read some book or they discovered some series of mystical writings or references to certain ancient esoteric schools, and it will just immediately strike them that this is it. You may have to go through several books, but then you finally find something somewhere. Almost all Sir Galahads and Madam Sir Galahads. You finally stumble across something, you go, that's it, that's it. I don't know whether I'll find any more, but this, you just know that's it for me. Then you could say, if someone asks you, what are you up to now? You still reading those weird occult books? And they go, well, I did for a while, but I found out. Have you ever read, and you mention a book to your friend? They go, well, no. They go, let me get it for you. That is it? You remember all that stuff we talked about? Yeah. I found something. It was written in Russia in 1550, and it was supposedly by some monk. Supposed to be part of the orthodox. Yeah, just something. And you say, but that's it. I read it, and it's the very things we talked about. You can read it in such a way that it is a metaphor for an explanation of all religion, the whole development of civilization, interpersonal relationships, everything. And so it would sound as though, and especially the more obscure it is one reason that life is provided. I assume nobody's going to get their feelings hurt and disappointed today. Is one reason life is provided, so-called mystical literature, esoteric works, the occult, is to keep people from actually finding out what it is. And so you find a book somewhere, you find what seems to be surely the original source of, and perhaps still the protector of, the truth. This kind of writing, this particular school, this line of thought, this area of mystical effort within some religion, and the more obscure it is, in other words, it's outside the mainstream of all the major religions, that gives you impetus already to believe that there is more to it than meets the eye. Or for those of you that know better, that there appears to be more to it than there is. Meets the eye, meets the eye. So the more obscure it is, the further away it is from you, the more exotic it is, the less out of the mainstream it is part of the built-in conspiracy that every would-be Sir Galahad, every would-be mystic will eventually nibble on some bait, that some group of writings will become their vade mecum, it will become their holy grail, or at least the light they assume that will lead them to the holy grail, that this is it. This man is writing for me. He wrote, I don't know who he was, I can't believe that he lived on the other side of the world 600 years ago, but that man, he read that's it. And you just want to kiss the book and just hug it, and God, if I could have met, ooh, and you're just sure that's it. The search for the truth after that, though, what I'm saying is you believe now that you're at least on a more precise path than major religion, than you had been. That you have now found something outside this main superhighway down which everyone tries to drive, and therefore it cannot have any exceptional message to it. And you go off on this side path. And it all seems right. The more obscure it is, the more arcane, the more foreign it is, the righter it seems to the person to begin with. The harder it is to locate additional information. Who is this monk so-and-so? Who is Father so-and-so? Then you start ending up saving your money just to go to New York or to Washington and get in the Library of Congress or the New York Public Library. You can't believe that there's nothing about this man. Here it is. To you, you think, I could have made it even earlier, that here it is. This is where Jesus, this is where Buddha, this is where everybody stole their material. This guy right here. Let me rechange it and say it was an Egyptian, 3000 BC, some priest. And you say, I cannot believe this. Am I the only person in the world that's discovered this man wrote the history of Western and Eastern religion, spiritual thought, and philosophy? He wrote it in advance 3,000 years ago, and I can't even find his name listed under authors in my local library. It seems then that you are truly on some worthwhile path, the path to you. But you understand that the conspiracy is still there? Because now what you're seeking is additional proof that he was correct. It is why I understand that there have been at least one or two people in the last few years that have sort of made kicking motions and kind of spitting sounds at the mystical heroes of life. It's just what I heard. Yeah. And assuming that whoever it was that did it knew what they were doing, it was a point that if you got a hero, the rest of your life you end up wanting to prove he's right. You look, you'll turn around and you'll read terms that he had written. And now you suddenly hear that term on television or some new author in a novel or something. You go, wait a minute. He is having more influence, I imagine. It is now beginning to work subconsciously. It is now beginning to drift in. And you're just sure. And you want to protect him. If you recall last time, I was mentioning the conspiracies in a sense that people believe, or they could believe that there are conspiracies trying to keep man's intellectual, artistic, spiritual, but it's all intellectual, and those of you are beginning to see it, to keep his development in check. The idea of not just trying to hold down civil unrest by giving them games and circuses has always worked and still works. But beyond that would be somebody, if I didn't make it clear enough last time, a little conversation, imaginary conversation between a couple of people. And when I'm saying, you realize Nero, Caesar, the king, you realize he keeps promising to give us more civil liberties, a voting right, and you realize that every year, when it comes time, he says, I'll do it next year. And by the time part of that year is going around and some of the college kids are out there and trying to burn up haystacks and raise hell, all he'll do is announce a whole new series of games. He'll bring in some whole new bunch of slaves to throw little lines. He'll do something. They go, yeah, that's true. They sip their coffee. They think a minute. And one of them says, turning philosophical, he says, you know something else? Besides you and I being smart enough to realize what he's doing, you know something else? There could be a conspiracy behind that, not only that keeps us from trying to extend ourselves into physical, into civil and physical additional freedoms. He's not only holding us in check by these kind of distractions that appeal to the body and the baser instincts of man, but you realize that behind that, it could almost be, I could almost believe, it's hard to know, thinking about how dumb that son of a bitch is, but it's almost as though that behind all that's a conspiracy. Maybe somebody's running him, but it's almost like it's a conspiracy, not just to keep us down and in check civilly and politically, but it's to keep us from actually beginning to think any more than we do, to be more conscious, to be more insightful, to widen our intellectual vistas. Another guy thinks. And he thinks, well, you're right, that son of a bitch seems so dumb. I mean, so crude. We've all been around him all these years. I can't really believe that he's that smart. But even if he's not, even if that's not going on, if we look at the results of what happens, it might as well be going on because we've got the same result. And of course, if those really hard up for a good hobby, then they can start to believe in conspiracies behind conspiracies, which is always a good one. That, yeah, they've got these puppet guys that they put them up certain conspiracies, and they believe they're running things, which they're not. But then there are people that believe they're running them, and they're not running them. There's no end to it. It's a pretty cheap hobby. Except I assume sometimes finally for having to buy extra strength Tylenol for extreme migraines. That's just my guess. the conspiracy would almost seem to be true, that there would be something going on, not just to hold down men politically, and by politically I also include economically, because that's always the heart of the conspiratorial theories. It's always poor people, if you ever notice. If you want to think about that, there's never been a member, this is known fact, it's hidden, I don't know why they don't let the information, but there has never been any member of the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Dodges, the Fords, you get me? There's never been a record of any really rich person saying that they believe there's a conspiracy going on. Of course, that fits other things beside conspiratorial theories, but so I'm including economic. When I say political, I'm just saying anything other than the inner life of man. It is easy enough to claim such conspiracies, and it fits. You can make it fit. And I would also add this: if you think that the rich people in the world would not conspire to stay rich and keep you poor, or the people in power would not conspire to keep you absolutely out of power, then you don't even need conspiratorial theories. You're too dumb to probably even know what the word is. You should be out living with the squirrels where things go a lot better. And you'd be more appreciated. So it's not that they wouldn't, but the idea that somebody's, at any rate, we're talking about the other conspiracy, the other level that no one ever discusses. Because you could ask yourself, why about that? But back to my two guys having my imaginary conversation. And so they both agree. You understand, both parts I'm playing, these guys are not complete fruitcakes. They're not completely, they weren't fully baked. They're not completely out of it. But they do agree that it's obvious that the king, this is obvious, many people have noticed this, that the king or the Caesar will keep throwing out physical distractions to keep the people, periodically he'll do it, to keep them politically subdued as much as possible. And you can normally do that with a crowd just by the circuses and the games. So they see that. That's not a big secret. He does it and it works. They can sit there and complain about it and bemoan the fact of the low level of intelligence of their fellow villagers, but that's simply a fact. That's not a conspiracy. He's doing it. They're not dumb enough, they're not smart enough to see it. But so they can say, well, that's a conspiracy, but it's really just due to their stupidity. So they go, yeah. And it does work. And they both go, yeah. And they sip their coffee. And he says, but it also, look at the intelligence of all of us here in the village, here in the kingdom. Look how much it's changed. I mean, look how long it took us to realize what he's doing. And he goes, yeah. And we're sharp. Well, you know, we're just average people, or we're at least as smart as anybody that's here in the kingdom we've ever seen. They both go, yeah. But now look, there are other people in the kingdom that supposedly are as intelligent as we are. They have the same kind of credentials, same kind of education, yeah. And no one seems to notice it. Does anybody ever talk about this to you besides me? Do you ever hear it discussed? No. They're living right here in the midst of it. He does it to them continually. And we can call it a conspiracy that he's doing one thing, saying, go over here and have fun. And they do that, and it keeps them from trying to gain some of their power, or some power away from him, some economic, some political power. And they say, well, it's amazing. On several levels. It's amazing it took us 20 years to realize this. And I go, yeah. They sip their coffee. And they go, but it's even more amazing that no one else realizes it. People with higher intellectual positions than us, people regarded as greater thinkers than we are. We're just average guys, and no one even notices it, you know? Then my two men would eventually get around, one of them, to say, well, do you know what? It's almost as though there's a conspiracy. And again, he might be hard-pressed to attribute all of its comings and goings or its source to the king. But he would say, did you know it's almost as though there is a conspiracy of another sort, of a whole nother variety, a whole nother level, wherein it seems as though there are people, or there's forces somewhere trying to keep man, not just physically, politically and economically, where he is, under control, subdued, passive as much as possible. But it's almost as though there's a conspiracy going on to keep man that way intellectually. So you've never heard that. There's no such thing as an intellectual conspiracy regarding man's intellect. And yet it should be just one small step. Even these people that are just all wired up about it being an absolute political or economic conspiracy, the ones I'm referring to that are not either wound tight enough or too tight. Well, the kind of people that you don't sit next to a bus on, that they're fanatical. You would think that sooner or later, even they would carry it further, that they'd get tired of that, and somebody would try to make a new name for themselves and go, wait a minute. It's bad enough that they've got this conspiracy working on us economically and politically, but I've discovered a new one. It's these whole bunch of pointy-headed intellectuals hiding out in Bern or Singapore or Hanover. And you know what they're doing? They've come up with a conspiracy to keep man dumb. Of course, now that I've said that, I know why, for one reason, that you never hear of it. Because no one's smart enough to come up with that. Or if they did, I give it to them. Now it'll be on cable TV, so for some conspiratorial nut, there it is, there's your new one, that there's an actual conspiracy. Your others are right. I ought to give them that to get their attention. There has been one for years and years and years and years, as long as civilization almost. A conspiracy going on amongst people, I'm not even going into who it might be, but to keep man subjective to greater powers, politically, economically. That's true. But there's also one. The time has finally come. It's been gradual, but now there's one going on full blast that is conspiracy to control man and to keep him dumb. Now, I shouldn't say control. It's not just control his mind, because that fits in their political conspiratorial theories. It's not to control the mind. It's just to keep him dumb. Because notice all over the world, there's not one political idea. There's not one economic system of slavery. There are many. So it's not a control. It's just to keep man where he is intellectually, not to get any smarter. All right, now I give it to them. Now why can't they use it? No. Even if they go, there's a good idea. There's a place to make my reputation. If he ain't going to use it, I'll use it. You know why they won't use it? Because now they can sit down and turn off the TV and go, that's a great idea. How are they going to explain, because they can't understand, how could somebody conspire to keep me stupid? Of course, they could be stupid enough to run out first and announce, I've got a new conspiratorial theory, to bring their little, cult together. And they go, it's a new one. I've discovered an even more dastardly level. And they go, let's hear it, let's hear it. And they go, there's a conspiracy going on to keep man in slavery intellectually, to keep him dumb. And they go, wow, God, it's worse than we thought. And they're just loving it. And they go, how does it work? And he goes, okay. Isn't that something? They go, yeah. I discovered it. I'm the one who pieced it all together. And they go, it's wonderful. That's why you're our leader. How are they doing it? We never noticed. How are they doing it? Okay. The ordinary mind got no idea. You can't go anywhere with that and go, how are you kept in the condition you're in? Does anyone like, I'll go back to one of my own. The ordinary mind, trying to study itself, is like a tree trying to climb itself. And so the idea sounds great, or it could sound great to the conspiratorial elements, until they try to think about it, much less try to explain it. And there's not one word. There's no way they can explain what the conspiracy could be. Because you are the conspiracy. The mind is a conspiracy. You ride off, you begin a search looking for something, and it is always from a preconceived position. You always start out looking through your own knothole. You consider it your own intellectual interest. You consider it your own. You can call it anything you want to. You can say, no, I'm going off now. I'm leaving the castle of my father. I'm leaving my homeland. I'm leaving everything. My religion, my past politics. I have a full sense of what it takes to be a great mystical seeker. A great knight. I'm riding off. The whole world is before me. There are no roads here. The road stops at the edge of the moat. I'm on my own. I can go. And it's a lie. And most people never get past that. It's a delusion. Because you're starting off trying to prove something. You can call it all manner of fancy names, such as, well, this is my adventure for the truth. This is my search for the secret of life. With no, and you can add, with no preconceived notions what it is. I simply want to find the truth. It's not possible. You're right off looking for something. You are looking for evidence to prove some position, to bolster something that you already think. Most people never get past that. Most people that know the secret of life, most of the time don't talk to most of the people because they mostly understand what the other people are going to mostly think and how they're mostly going to react. Would you like to tell us how? It's nothing outstanding. It's just, it's most of them going, well, I can agree to some of that, but wait a minute. What's there to agree to? It is that the mind, I'll try this one on you again. It never seems to go over with quite the thud or explosion that I expected originally. But the thing is, with the human mind, with the ordinary mind, you try and describe life, to just detail life, and if people listen to you at all, they will hear a criticism. And it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter how you preface it. Doesn't matter how you try and protect it. If they hear it, if they pay any attention, they hear it as a criticism. And they may not even hear it as a criticism that, I'm stretching it now, but they may not even hear it as a criticism that you even momentarily might entertain just to get their attention. If they go, wait a minute, are you saying so-and-so? Then you might go, okay, not really, but take it from there and let's move a little further. They won't even get that close. They will hear another language. The question that actually came in was someone asked, how is it language seems to be so faulty? How much fault tolerance they even put in language as opposed to, and they point out such things as computer language or even mathematics. That is, how can people speak to one another and from all kinds of observations, not me saying it, all of you would agree, your mind would want to do it selectively, but you could pick out enough examples immediately that for any sophisticated person to go, yeah, that is being that language can be so faulty that two people are talking. And either one of them or both of them or somebody outside can be observing, and they go blah, 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 and the person goes blah, 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 and they go blah, 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 and they go through, 2 or 3 dance steps, and then it's like, okay. And they seem to agree on something. One goes, well, I see what you mean. And if you're just sitting there behind them in the booth at the Waffle House and listening, you have the distinct impression that they were talking about 2 different things. That the person went, oh, okay. That they didn't understand that if you could turn around and inject yourself without you being taken as an outside, uninvited carper and critic, if you said, by the way, no offense, which you're wasting your time. That's like me saying, all right, now this is no attack on religion or politics. Yeah, right. But if you turned around to the person, you just go, no offense, you guys seem like you're very intelligent and you were discussing philosophical matters. And I go, yes. And go, that last little byplay you did when you were talking about, that one of you said that you thought that perhaps the beginning of all religion came from such and such when the man became less of a hunting creature and became more agrarian and blah, blah, another person went, yeah. Well, I heard you finally, sir, I believe it was you, your voice, that you said, well, I see what you mean. And from what you said, now you guys not getting upset at me, are you? Of course they are, but I'm going ahead and make this up. Let's assume they go, well, okay, no, what? In other words, let's assume that they're actually seekers of the truth, which they're not, so this whole thing is invalid, but what the hell? And so they go, well, no, what is it? Because let's assume they are philosophical, that they are even would-be mystics. And you go, all right, it's just this. I don't have a point to make to either one of you. I'm not saying that I disagree or whatever. What I wanted to point out was something in another area, and that is, I'm almost convinced. They go, okay. And if they buy that, you go, all right, let me tell you this. I am convinced. I could hear your tone of voice. I listened to the words. And right toward then, when you were saying, well, you mean that when men started gathering in cities and that then religion grew from, and the other guy, he said, yeah. And I said, but what you meant was, I could hear what you were insinuating was that was something that happened because of man's sexual desire having to be now funneled toward one person, he went, yeah. And you turn to the other guy and go, all right, now you didn't hear that. You thought he was just talking about man now being more settled in a closed environment like in a township. And the other guy go, you're right. And so then you say, so my point being, you guys are still not offended, are you? And this still being a fairy tale. They go, well, no, we're delighted. And you say, well, the point being, let's assume these are two close friends. They've been shooting the bullshit of philosophical stuff like this late at night in coffee shops for years, and they thought they understood each other. They can talk in almost shorthand. They have many of the same. Anyway, and you go, but me just sitting here, you realize what I heard, and now you're agreeing. When he went, blah, 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 about religion, and you went, well, now, yeah, you're right. Now, I know it's no big deal, but isn't it interesting that you guys, as well as you know each other, and you agreed to that, and that you hear what I pointed out, you realize you agreed to something that you didn't hear correctly. And he goes, well, you're right. This happens continually. And it happens not only in the world of philosophical thought, it happens especially in romantic situations, well, everything. Just in all human conversation, after the question is why I wrote The Wind of Night on One World, life arranged it for the advanced creatures on that planet so that they could advance even further, impose this kind of magical communication systems wherein anybody can say almost anything. They can just say almost anything. I said, no matter how nonsensical, and I didn't even want to say that, but I did it already. That one person can say almost anything, and other people, regardless of how much sense it made or regardless of what he intended, that they can hear it and just go on as though, okay, yeah. This rings up, the person did, which I've already been hitting on myself, but the person asked the question, how can this be? How can it keep happening and just things not explode? See, that's getting awfully close to the secret, folks. Because there's exactly the point. Is they don't explode because it doesn't matter. I almost stopped back there 2 minutes ago with my little thing in the Waffle House. Because now listen to this. Back where we were, I'm going to pick up where we left it off. That you got the guys, I assume you followed me, that you got these two guys, you point out to them that you just sitting there listening as an uninvolved third party, and you knew exactly the kind of area they're talking about, but you heard that the one guy right toward them, when he went, well, it seems to me that religion happened as man fell down, blah, blah, and you told him, you said, but you, the other guy, you thought, you heard him just saying it had to do with man's becoming a more stable and settled person, and what he was actually saying, am I right? You were actually referring to a change in the sexual relationships between people when they were out hunters, and now when they were beginning to be more agrarian and living in communities. And the other guy says, yeah, that is, as a matter of fact, what I had in mind. Now you follow? And they're both hearing what you say, this being made up. And so you say, and so in other words, you understand that you guys thought you agreed with each other, and you didn't. He agreed to something that the other guy didn't mean. And they both go, you're right. But how about this? It still worked. And I don't mean just vaguely. I'm going back now to a specific example, even though I didn't flesh it all out. The two guys are actually listening. Let's say they're not talking nonsensical. The guy that at the end went, you're right, I see what you mean. That he did hear, literally. He was paying good attention to his buddy, and he heard him and went, yeah. And he agreed to something that the guy didn't mean, but it still fit. Now that's a real specific example. Now back to this kind of question, why doesn't everything explode? Or back to mine, which is a more widescreen, Panavision, magnanimous telling of it, is that on this one planet, life arranged for the advanced creatures so that they could advance more, that they were operating under this communication system, that whereas no matter what you said, everybody else understood it. Now, there's of course a lot left out of all of my stories. The point being, whatever you say, now there's plenty of gibberish goes on in life. We all know that. And there are things that don't amount to anything. But now the person asks a question, like you would, when you think about it, if it is just gibberish, if it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter whether somebody hears you. Now if you're rolling along the radio and the window down, it's playing real loud and the music's still going, and the record song gets through on the radio, and you turn to the person next to you and go, was that Ira Smith? And they thought you said, was that Jimmy Smith or Billy or something? They misunderstood, and you went, yeah, I guess that was their new one. And you ask one group, like, was that so-and-so? And they misunderstood you. Now we can say, well, what the hell difference does it make? None. But when it gets to the areas, and I'm not going to decide, when it gets to the areas that people think are important, that they would think, like in personal relationships, or the person they give an example, but you know exactly what they mean, that how can it be when you have to be precise running a computer? You could be talking about making or losing or squandering large sums of money, running your business, or in mathematics you could be running, getting a rocket ship off the launching pad, that you have to be precise. We're talking about precise, folks. We know what precise means. You can't say, well, what's the equation that's going to get this NASA rocket off? And the guy goes, well, it's more or less. We know that's not true. And yet you can be talking about what seems to be important matters, and it can be apparently important matters on even a greater scale of the president says something, the head of the Federal Reserve Bank, the Minister of Finance or War says, well, blah, 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 and he gets through, and people may get up and cheer. And if you think about it a second, all of Congress gets up and cheers. 100 so-called literate and decent men, they get up and they cheer the president, and you think, what the hell did he say? And maybe you're sitting there with somebody else, and they think he said one thing, you think he said another, or you just thought, well, hey, the whole thing. He didn't say anything. And how they not only applauded, suddenly a couple of them up front, and his party stood and started. Now all started this. And you thought, well, it's as though it was a bad movie. Maybe, but it doesn't matter. One of the things, there is a common complaint, as you know, about people being, unqualified people being in positions of power, in important positions. And I've had enough fuel. I mean, you could take some of the things I said if you were reviewing and go, well, that's true. I've always thought that. We got people, we got presidents, prime ministers, heads of churches, important people in all kinds of cabinet positions, big business, and they're just unqualified. It pops up all the time. You can think of some example. They catch a guy swindling. They find out that a priest is a child abuser and all kinds of things. They just say they're, I'm not trying to insinuate just sexual, as you know, but they can say they're unqualified as to the talent supposedly involved, or apparently, unquestionably, that should be involved for their job. And it turns out the guy the governor appoints to be the head of the State Department of Education, first time he signs, tries to drop some legislation, misspells the word education. That kind of thing. And you go, isn't that just like life? Totally unqualified people. And you find out that somebody in charge of some important thing, and you meet them or hear them speak, and you think, oh my God, I can't believe they got their finger on an important button somewhere. These people could be running my future. This kind of people I have to go and stand before to be judged for some legal affair, some supplication I'm making to the government. And these people, I can't believe this. Sure you can. You know what the complaint is? The real basis of the complaint, nobody can verbalize it. The real basis of the complaint is the fact that it doesn't matter. That's what the complaint is. Complaint wouldn't be the word that people would use, but they start off complaining about unqualified people in important positions throughout history and right today. And they'll complain, and they'll even say they're frightened that something should be done. And I go back, I'm going to tell you, the real fright, they cannot intellectualize it, much less verbalize it, but the real fright, and even this doesn't fit because rhetorically in a linear world, this doesn't fit. But it's you people, so I'll try it. They don't know what the fear is, but the real fear is, the real complaint is, that sure there are unqualified people everywhere. And it doesn't make one damn bit of difference. And there's nothing to say after that. Two guys in the booth behind you can say, Miss, can we have a check? And they'll probably leave without speaking to you or each other. There's nothing else to say. And I could say there's very little after that to see, which is why people can't look that way. It's damn near blinding. It's at least the ordinary mind, it is very disorienting. It's like running across a piece of the secret, or even a fair reflection of the secret when you're not ready for it. It's sort of like, I don't want to end on a downer, but it's sort of like being a nice healthy cow and you've staggered into the bailiwick of the Hormel brothers and someone has one of these stun sticks and put it to your head just to get you ready for the worst. We won't go any further, but at least they have the decency to kind of stun the poor cow. That's the conspiracy that life does to you, the ordinary mind, that, well, okay. Now I'm beginning to have some interest in what's going on in life. And plus, I'm beginning to have a pretty good idea where to look. You don't realize it, but you have been a cow, perhaps a well-meaning cow, and someday I know we'll get into what well-meaning cows and humans mean, signify. But it's as though you have staggered in out of, you might think, out of the slop in the mire of the common stockyard into a building. Perhaps to a cow it appears to be even a spiritually based building, but at least it's better than out there without. And as soon as you get in the door, and somebody goes, boom, and you're just kind of stunned for humane purposes, so that you don't know what's about to happen to you. This is known as being educated, developing your own personality, at least having the ability to see that there are people totally unqualified or in positions of authority and importance. And something has got to be done about it, or at least I've got to raise the alarm and I've got to think about it. I like to end the question, how can this be and things just don't all explode? See? Well, there's the answer. How can this be and just things don't all explode? I mean, it's the answer. The question's the answer as always. Because it don't. And then people want to go, nuh-uh, no.